football is about more than football.
In 1991, Down defeated Meath to win the All-Ireland Senior Football Championship. It was a battle royal that day. We've gathered these two great squads together again, but this time it's the game of their lives. This is Extra Time.
The moment has finally arrived, the climax of the football year.
It was a very, very good Meath team with a lot of good players. Probably hasn't been a better team that's come out of Leinster for a long, long, long time.
We ran into a Down team in 1991. Probably the most skillful of that era I can remember was that Down team.
Pete McGrath told us, when you go out, take a good look around you and take in everything in the stand, and then close your horizon down to the perimeter of the field, because that's your arena for the next 70 minutes.
So you've just been watching some of Extra Time. It's a brand new documentary from documentary maker Donal O'Neill, who you might remember as the co-founder as well of the Gaelic Players Association. And I'm delighted to say that live from Newry this morning, not South Africa, it's Donal O'Neill. How are you, Donal?
Oh, I'm fantastic. Thanks for having me.
So talk to us about Extra Time. Where did the idea for this documentary come from?
Well, I suppose the original seed of my involvement would have been back in 2010 when my own father suffered a heart attack. Kevin, he played in the Down teams of 60-61, and I went on a journey to investigate health, human performance, and in particular heart health. And I've made several documentaries and written a book with a cardiologist in the UK recently. So for several years I've been on this path, and about a year and a half ago, an Irish philanthropist, one of our most successful global businessmen, David Bobbitt, his company is H&K International. David contacted me, invited me to dinner in Dublin, and asked me, was there anything that he could help me with? And this idea came to mind because, funny enough, Paddy O'Rourke, the Down captain from the 1991 team, who lifted the Sam Maguire, Paddy had contacted me not long before that to say that he enjoyed what I was doing and is there anything he could help me with. So we really put two and two together, and I went back to Paddy and said, could you help us round up those Meath boys, and why don't we do a replay of the 1991 final and raise awareness for heart disease in Ireland. And David Bobbitt had undertaken the scan that you see the players take in Extra Time, and it saved his life 10 years ago. It's an absolutely remarkable piece of prognostic technology that's now readily available in Ireland, thankfully. So we gathered up, 24 on each squad. It was originally meant to be just 5 or 6, but Jerry McEntee, the great Meath player, who's now a surgeon, of course, Jerry thought it would be important to scan the entire squad, which was wonderful for the squads. It made the production a logistical challenge, to say the least. But the IHDA, which is a charity, Irish Heart Disease Awareness, that David Bobbitt had founded several years ago, they agreed to underwrite that. So it was a very gratuitous, unfortunate turn of events, and it's given us something that's turned into quite a remarkable adventure. And what we're going to screen tomorrow, we're gathering the two squads at the Croke Park Hotel, is just a 30-minute short, because as we went through the screening process, what started out as a light entertaining piece took a bit of a dark turn, because we discovered that some of these men, and they're still in remarkable condition, many of them, despite that fact, their arteries were showing some fairly serious incidences of degradation in some cases. So we've ended up with two pieces, a 30-minute, parochial GAA, 90s feeling piece that will appeal to anybody who's probably middle-aged and remembers the game. And even if you don't, it'll be great to look back and see Linden, McCartan, Flynn, and see these boys in their pomp and what football used to look like back in that era. So I think it'll be very enjoyable for any GAA fans, but it also carries a serious message, and that is a message that the IHDA have been working very hard to get out, and that's know your score, because the calcium scan we get done for the players shows up arterial damage in the arteries, just like you would see in an X-ray or a mammogram. So it's very revealing. It's quite easy to get it done, costs about €200, and in the course of doing what we're doing, we've certainly saved more than one life between these two squads.
How many people of the two teams showed up to actually have some sort of negative results in that heart screening scan?
Well, I can tell you, we won't obviously talk about individual names. We'll get to that in the feature with one or two of the players, but 9 of them required serious consultation with cardiologists. So it was in around 20%, and that's interesting because by the time the average male gets to 50 years of age, they will have some calcification in the arteries, which is the heart disease process. But you don't expect it. When you see these icons of yesteryear, you kind of expect them to stay that way. They're young forever and all of that. But we know that, you know, players go on to develop the diseases that the rest of us develop. And of course, Down lost the great Ambrose Rogers at 39 years of age. Gary Mason, the great wing half forward, had already had a heart attack. We couldn't scan Gary because that ruled him out. And, you know, these things happen. And when we hear of GAA players, retired GAA players dying young, we don't really discuss why or what could be done about it. So we just felt that if we're losing the population of Hill 16 or the equivalent thereof every year to heart disease, maybe by gathering these icons of the past and letting men see that, you know, well, if Mick Lyons is presenting for that test or Mickey Linden, maybe I should get it done. And that's the simple message. Just know your score, get the information, and then move forward with that information with your medical advisors.
Was there a common theme at all within the 20% of why these results were showing up? Was it a lack of exercise? Was it diet? Or what was there a common thread?
Well, I can tell you, again, without revealing names, we will get to that in the feature, but one of the players who would have been in the top 1% fitness profile, cardiovascular fitness for his age, his arteries were in the bottom 1%.
Right.
So what we're seeing is, and people need to understand that, I mean, the heart as a piece of machinery is one thing, but the process that we're looking to identify is really arterial damage, and this is a disease of the soft tissues. And we found disease in men that, well, to be honest, I was that shocked that I stood back from the production for 1 week. I didn't quite know what to do with the information. We didn't expect to see it. It was meant to be a light, entertaining, nostalgic piece, and it took quite a dark turn. So on the one hand, it's good to have identified, you know, players that otherwise would have just wandered through life thinking they're flying fit because they are, but yet beneath the bonnet, you know, heart disease was stalking them very, very aggressively without their knowing. And that's the key thing. There may be no symptoms until you've had the heart attack.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Like, is there any coincidence here that there may be a higher number amongst GAA players or sports people who kind of play at an amateur level, and I don't know, maybe the kind of routine of it wouldn't be as professional as, say, it would be in soccer and rugby? Is there any evidence at all that might suggest that this could be a little bit of a higher percentage within GAA and particularly former GAA players?
That's a great question, Owen. The answer is probably not. I mean, we've got Professor Tim Noakes, probably the greatest endurance sports scientist of this or any era, is now very interested in the results that we found. Equally, Dr. Peter Burkner, the great Australian sports medic, because it's very unusual to see asymptomatic middle-aged men, meaning they're not displaying any symptoms of anything, present for these scans. The radiologists were stunned at what they were seeing. So the correlation between fitness and arterial health is not clear-cut at all. There does seem to be a case that, you know, some elite sportsmen and athletes who would have trained to the extent of some of these men, that may not be just beneficial for each and everybody. And the bottom line is you've got to really get under the bonnet in your own body, know your score, and, you know, take your options and your advice from there, because there just aren't any guarantees. You know, we talk about heart disease and heart conditions, but this is just the human condition. You don't know where you are until you've had this scan when it comes to arterial health.
Yeah, we've heard about Noakes actually before. He's a teacher of Ross Tucker, who we'd often have on the show here. Someone we should definitely get on the show at some future point. Like, just to kind of to finish up on this, like, it's hopefully going to kickstart a bit of a discussion, because, as you say, these men who you would have thought you would have been in fairly good nick go for the scan because of your work that you're doing, and ultimately they may not have done this anyway. So it's a shock for them, but I guess a more positive shock, if you can put it like that. But also, just the last time I can remember reading something about this was Sean Kavanagh's book last year, when he said after Cormac McAnallen's death that Mickey Hart got everybody down to Dublin and they all did scans in their heart at the time, and even then there was a couple of results that were a little bit surprising. So it's not just former GAA players who may not be exercising as much and not eating as well as they were during their playing days. It's also current players very much in the crosshairs here as well.
Well, I think we all remember when Cormac left us, and the initiative that followed that was very progressive. I mean, what I'd like to see, and it's hard sometimes not to put the old GPA hat on, even though it's been a long, long time ago. You know, I stood back from this and thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if the GAA had a fund to provide a CSC scan for every former inter-county player when they reach 45 years of age, because we're now scanning them on the way in. Why don't we, do our best to protect these men and just as a tip of the hat, give them that information at age 45, which is when the average man should be presenting for this scan. And it's so beneficial. It's non-invasive. It takes 5 minutes, and it's something that could easily be rolled out. We use the Affidea clinic down in Naas. You can get it done in the Blackrock Clinic and many other centres around the country. The Ulster Independent Clinic in Belfast. And once you know your score, you're set up. You've got a benchmark, and this disease progresses. And you can take the decisions, or not, as you decide, to try and do something about it. Colm Hanratty, the former Armagh footballer, who's a cardiologist, he looked after the lads in the follow-up, and he's now using this scan as a very effective tool in the first line of defence, because heart disease takes years and decades to develop. So I would love to see the GAA, the GPA offer something like this to retired players, because I don't think we do enough for them. People might say, I'll never think we do enough for players, and maybe that's true, but I certainly think, if Paddy had been scanned at 45, would he still be with us? With Ambrose Rogers, who didn't even make it to 40, would Ambrose still be here? I don't know, but, we've certainly saved a life or two in the making of this, simple production, thanks to the IHDA. So there's a broader question to be asked, I think.
Yeah, God, it's a pretty scary thought, actually. There is obviously more than enough scope to do this. We've seen with the GPA, in terms of their agreement with the GAA, that there is allowances made for surgeries of players and things like that. So there has been precedent for actually putting money aside for health benefits. This is definitely something, and I hope that after watching this and seeing that 20% figure that the GAA and the GPA potentially together can look at, to actually put some money aside, or to put some more investment into awareness around this thing, because clearly it's going to yield results.
Well, exactly, and I mentioned at the top end there, we lose an equivalent population to Hill 16, 10,000 people a year. And I think, the players that engage in inter-county football and hurling, I just think they deserve a bit more at the back end of those careers. And I think something like this would give them information that's useful for the game of their lives, and that's the game they get into once they retire, because this is what kills us in Ireland. Heart disease is what gets us. So why don't we just take a simple scan, make it available to retired inter-county players, and let them know where they are?
Donal, we should talk about some of the other issues in Gaelic games at the moment. Of course, none of them as perhaps as grave as what you've covered there in extra time. But one of the things that's actually just been in the newspapers this morning is Wexford's Rory O'Connor's quotes talking about the fact that professionalism and pay for play is perhaps only a matter of time away, that before he retires, he's 20 years old at the moment, so before he retires, he reckons there will be some pay for play for GAA players. It's reminiscent of your own quote in 2008, where you said it's only a matter of time before players get paid.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a case of lather, rinse, repeat on. You can go back to the 70s when the first calls for this came out. I think you'll know the gentleman who wrote the book, A Kerry Footballer. He said, let's have 5 professionals in each team, and that's been forgotten. And I think every generation has their own thoughts on this. Obviously, O'Connell in the 70s was an absolute icon. So it always intrigued me that his comments were never picked up on in my time with the GPA. But listen, I think my position doesn't change. When you keep pummeling the commercial agenda and you treat the sport and you use the terminology that professional sports use, you're really in a situation where players will ramp up demands. And at some point, it's a bit like the boiling frog syndrome. This, if it happens, will probably happen overnight, and it will happen because it'll be event-based. And I've always said that it only takes one team at the top end, because when these teams hit Croke Park on those 2 Sundays in September, there's tens of millions at stake between sponsors, television rights, contracts, agreements. The more the GAA immerse themselves in the landscape of commercial agreements, the more exposed they are to one team really attacking this aggressively. Mecco did it with Kerry in the 80s. You know, I'm sure some people remember, maybe younger listeners don't, the standoff that O'Dwyer had with the authorities and the Adidas jerseys and whatnot. And he told them, listen, we're not taking the field. And when you have powerful individuals like that, and teams with individuals who are willing to take those stances, that threat always sits there. And when that threat sits there, you're just waiting for that team to come along. And I can't tell you when, but I can tell you the landscape is set up for it. And it'll be determined, I don't think, by anything other than a single team-based call at the appropriate time. That's my view, because the GAA have created that environment. Will it happen? I don't know, but it'll be interesting to track it.
Yeah, like I guess there is a difference when you look at the tone of quotes between Rory O'Connor saying, I suspect it'll happen before the end of my career, and somebody saying, I want this to happen and I want this now. We deserve to get paid. There isn't actually a sense of demand from the players. There's a sense of suspicion that they might actually happen eventually, but I'm not sure if there actually is that clamour that might actually result in something as drastic as you say there.
I don't think it's there at the moment. The point I'm making is that the landscape is there. If you took Mick O'Dwyer's great Kerry team and the environment in which they operated, functioned, and the relationship they had with the GAA, if you put that into the modern landscape, you would see something happen.
Right.
So Dublin are the equivalent in sporting terms, but they're not, let's say, politically, they're a different animal. It's not going to happen with this Dublin team. But Mecco's great Kerry team and the nature of the relationship Mecco had with the GAA, if you were to, put that into today's environment, I think that'd be very interesting. Maybe that's my next movie.
Like the question here is the role in the GPA if something like this happened. Like when you stepped down with the GPA, you were saying that it had become more of a political force now, and that's the way that the GAA itself needs to go, that going forward the GPA is going to be more about the business of politics as opposed to the commercial side. That's probably changed though since you've stepped down from the GPA, and granted it's a bit of time ago since, and a lot of things have happened, a lot of deals have been struck.
Yeah, I mean, there's no one better at the long-term play than the GAA. And, I was speaking to Colm Keys, the great journalist with The Independent, the other day, and he said, it's gone awful quiet. He almost sounded nostalgic for the good old days with a bit of aggro. And I guess the commercial deal that the GPA struck I thought it was an excellent deal. I thought it was 10 years too late, but, that's a different story. And I think that the political clout that they carry has kind of been dissipated and diluted, and the GAA would have done that very consciously. But they're very, very good at that. And, I don't think you'll see much venom or teeth from the GPA moving forward. And that's why I do think, if something were to happen, if you were, suggesting what will move the argument forward, I think it will come down to one team.
Like ultimately with the GPA, there is going to be a new deal negotiated soon. The notorious €6.2 million, I think it was, deal that was done a couple of years ago. That's set to expire at the end of this year. There's obviously a new chief in there now, in Paul Flynn. So perhaps a new face means a new tactic in negotiations. I'm not sure what you think on that front, Donal.
Listen, I think the precedent has been established. I think commercially I'm talking about, I think it's a very good precedent. And I'm not sure there's much of a job to be done. I mean, there's a whiff of the civil service about it now, because the money comes in, you've got to find ways to spend it. And, that's not a hugely exciting space to be in. I mean, let's be honest. And I think that it will be business as usual, because I'd say the GAA are really quite happy once they accepted that they did need to show up and present some additional options for players. They've done that. So I don't think you'll see the boat being rocked too much from either side, because I think it's a fairly comfortable arrangement, and it's one that we've become accustomed to now.
If you were told that when you were at the top of the GPA at the time, that you would be in a position where the boat probably wouldn't be rocked too much, would you have been satisfied with that? Well, no, but that's just me. I mean, I think that you need to keep the smile on one side, snarl on the other. And I suppose, it was a very, very difficult environment, but,
myself and Desi and the lads, we had a great time going to war and fighting for, very, very genuine benefits and rights. I mean, when we started out, it was really, I think it was one of the Cork lads, it was about $5,000 out of pocket. He got injured playing in Croke Park. He was off work for 6 weeks and he got a kick in the hole for it. I mean, he got nothing. So there were very, very clear issues there. Today, you're looking at an environment where, if you look at the Dubs, they're the first squad and county in its entirety that have strategically, applied science to the development of a player and their approach to the game. So the whole thing has moved into an enormously professional era. There's no question about that. Every era says we're more professional than the last. Well, the Dubs have taken that to a whole new level, and I'm talking about even from an administrative level. So it's you're almost in a situation where it's kind of like Formula One. You've got 3-4 teams who count, and the rest are making up the numbers. And when that happens, it just takes you full circle back again to what we've just spoken about. Those top teams hold all the power, and they are the levers of change. And that's where I would be tracking to see what's going to happen next. But it's an interesting environment. I always want more for players, and I hope they get a great deal. I would just love to see that they're in a position to show a bit of teeth as and when required.
Yeah, like you say there that you used to love going to war, and I think that's totally fair. I think that's what the GPA essentially, it was kind of part of the job really. Now, things may just be, from a relationship point of view at the moment, much better than it was back then. But like I do wonder, like did Desi Farrell, for example, love going to war with you as well? Did he really enjoy the sense that there was a necessary conflict at play here, and sometimes being outside the tent was a better situation than being inside the tent, regardless of the commercial benefits?
Yeah, I mean, we had lengthy discussions about that, obviously, but I mean, let's be honest, we were just trying our best. We were really making it up as we went along, and we did that to the best of our abilities. But we were always working towards. My strategy was, it couldn't have been any simpler. I said we're going to gather as much money as possible, and we're going to set the pot on the table, because that's fundamentally how you get the GAA to negotiate. As an organisation, they've always been very, very focused on money, and they're very, very good at pretending that's not really the case. But when you're in there and you're at the table, it becomes blatantly apparent that that is the currency of the deal in the GAA. So we set out to disrupt the All-Stars and really penetrate the commercial programme and inflict some damage in that, while generating funds for ourselves at the same time. So there was always a two-footed approach. But I would like to have seen the deal happen much earlier than it did, and I felt we were ready back in the mid to late thousands. And
and why didn't it happen?
Well, let's just say, I would have had, and I wouldn't have actually been the most aggressive in terms of my position. That might have been the public perception and the GA's perception, but I was adopting a very, very strategic approach, because I was really deploying what I'd learned from Mark McCormick, the man who invented the business of sport that I'd worked for. And we had a fantastic advisor in Nick Couchman Harrington over in the UK. So I'd seen, and I'd been given a front seat and full exposure to how other sports had crossed this bridge. And that, we didn't all agree on it, and we sat back a bit. And
what were the differing views there when you said that there was when you all didn't agree on things? Like, your view is clear there. What was the opposing view?
Well, the opposing view was, at one point, the GA tried to buy me over, and we sat in a meeting in Croke Park, and Sean Kelly was there. And I mean, some of these meetings were good crack as well. I don't want to pretend it was all, Game of Thrones stuff, but
they're good crack as well, though, Donal.
They are great crack, but they basically suggested flat out, why don't you come and work for us, Donal? And
how much do they offer?
I thought it was the most ridiculous suggestion ever. I mean, this was about year 4 of the GPA, so I'd been working on a voluntary basis. It was just a big passion for me, and Desi thought that was a good idea. 1 or 2 others did, and I said, "Lad, you're mad." I said, "This is the greatest statement we've heard to date." I said, this tells me that we have them on the run. I said, "I don't care what's on the table, I'm not taking it." I said that is the meeting that we've been working towards. And of course I didn't entertain it, but I remember the expression in some of the officials' face. They didn't quite know what to do. when they realised I didn't want a ton of money. And it almost disarmed them. And it was probably the most enjoyable interaction I had with them, because I don't know what they thought. I think they thought I was just lying in my pockets or something. But it was a very, very interesting time. And I remember Frank McNamee, the Longford player, was in with us, a very, very astute bloke. And, you know, he could read the situation as clear as a bell. And we had great times discussing all these things, but there were just little points when, you know, if I'd gone in there at that point, the whole thing would have been done and dusted, and that would have been the end of it, because we were generating funds that would allow us to function. Obviously, we could employ Desi on a full-time basis, and we could get a bit of support around him, and we could go about our business. But in retrospect, when we did the Club Energise deal, and I enjoyed that immensely. Michael McCardle, who was the marketing director of CNC at the time, an absolutely phenomenally smart individual. He played rugby for Leinster. He understood sport. He understood where we were coming from, all of that. When we sat down to do the Energise deal, I said to him, at the contractual stage, I said, Michael, let's make this 10 years, not 5. Because Mark McCormick had always taught us in IMG, write the contract for as long as you can and put in the break clause. You do not want to be going back renegotiating. So I just pulled that card at the 11th hour, and I said to Michael, I said, listen, you may not be here, I may not be here, let's just, you know, put the players on a firm footing for 10 years. He's like, done. And that clause in that contract probably gave us a degree of comfort that robbed the GPA, just turned that snarl into a wee bit of a smile. And maybe we were just a bit too full of ourselves, and maybe that's my fault, because there was too much money on the table all of a sudden. And the Energise deal went on to be a phenomenal success. It really was a great piece of work. And Michael McCardle had the vision. You know, Desi and myself sat down and we almost directed the first ad. We wove in one of the scenes. I think Sully had hit, I think it was Shefflin, very, very hard in the All-Ireland hurling final that year. And we recreated some of these lovely little scenes from the game. The initial Club Energise ad won worldwide awards for advertising. It was shot down in a lake in Wicklow, and it was magnificent. We were on such a high, and the money was rolling in. And I think it became a problem. I think we maybe did our job too well. If that had been a 5-year deal, and we needed the money then, you know, perhaps there would have been an appetite to really go to war with the GAA at that point. And, you know, that's perhaps one of my regrets. I think the deal might have been too good.
That's very interesting. Like, I do want to just finish up on the documentary again, but just one final point about your time in that role in the GPA, and something you said there, like, speaking personally, if a job in the GAA is offered, and I'm sure it was well paid, Donal, and all that, it must have been a fairly tempting offer on your behalf. Like, so Desi was thinking to himself that maybe you should take the role, that you should go inside and actually work directly for the GAA, and you were saying you were kind of in conflict with Desi at that point, saying no, we shouldn't, we should stay on our own.
I just laughed it off the table. We didn't even get to talk money. I just said there's absolutely no way. It told me that strategically we were exactly where I'd been trying to get us to. And I just dismissed it. I'd no interest in doing that. But it was the reaction to that I enjoyed. And we had a good laugh about it internally as well. But yeah, interesting times, long time ago.
What would your advice be for Paul Flynn negotiating the new deal?
Carry on. The precedent has been set. I think Desi and the lads put a very good precedent in place, and I honestly don't think there'll be too many shockwaves coming from that negotiation. Everybody likes to trump them up and hoo-ha and all the rest, but once you've got contracts and you've got points of reference, these things flow very easily.
I wonder then, is there a space in the market now for another players' association to actually rock the boat a little bit more? Because as you say, like, I mean, this is a commercial deal which is actually churning up a good bit of money for, you know, good funds and good courses and things like that. Like, I do wonder, if you want to rock the boat, is another association needed? Is perhaps the CPA that body, I wonder?
Well, all I can say is good luck, because what we went through in the initial few years was it was something else. I mean, it was great fun, but wow, it was taxing to say the least. And I don't think so. I think the GAA, as I said, I think they've played a very solid long game, and I know they despised me, but I think they respected what I brought to the table. And you know, I look at how they've handled this over a 20-year period through that prism, and I have to say my hat is off to them. I think they've done a good job.
Yeah, well, let's hope they don't despise you, Donal. Hopefully that's a bit too strong. Listen, extra time, know your score. How can people watch it?
Well, the IHDA website is ihda.ie, and we'll have information on the 30-minute piece up there. And we're still filming for the feature-length documentary, which will come out later in the year, and hopefully we'll come back and chat to you about that. But simple message, know your score. Absolutely. We look forward to chatting to you then, Donal. Congratulations on it. It's brilliant work. Thanks a million for joining us. Thank you, Owen.